The United Nations has significantly revised its estimation of the number of casualties from the war, but it says it still believes figures provided by the Ministry of Health in Gaza are reliable.
We have the sad experience of coordinating with the Ministry of Health on casualty figures every few years for large mass casualty incidents in Gaza. And in past times, their figures have proven to be generally accurate.
While the overall number of casualties remains unchanged at more than 35,000, the breakdown between men, women, and children now looks different. Initially, more than 9,500 women and 14,500 children were reported killed in the Gaza Strip. But the UN now says under 5,000 women and 8,000 children are thought to have died. My next guest has been analyzing the death toll numbers in Gaza since January. Abraham Wyner is a professor of statistics and data science at the University of Pennsylvania. He joins us tonight from Philadelphia. Mr. Wyner, thank you so much for being here. Just how significant is this revision from the United Nations?
Well, it's no surprise to me and many other people who have been expecting a number like this to be much closer to the truth. It's surprising in the sense that they've essentially admitted that the numbers that they've been putting out in terms of the breakdown of men, women, and children, which is extremely important, has always been incorrect.
Now, I have read some reports that this happens often when there is, quote unquote, the fog of war. Do you buy that explanation?
Well, the fog of war didn't just automatically or recently descend. It's been there from the very beginning. The point is that you can't put out numbers that you don't have any accuracy about and pretend as if they're accurate, which has been happening since the very beginning. These numbers have been broadcast extremely widely, have picked up everywhere, and they weren't accompanied with uncertainty calculations, which would be necessary if it's foggy, which of course it is. You just can't come out now and say, oh, I'm sorry, we got it all wrong. And the way they got it all wrong is an effort to make Israel look like they're not actually prosecuting a war, but they're committing a war crime. And these numbers have been abetting that assertion, and people have accepted it without carefully examining it.
You wrote about this all the way back in March. What made you realize at that point in time something could be off with the numbers here?
Okay, so that was a pretty easy call. The UN numbers were breaking down the casualties into men, women, and children in proportions which almost exactly match the population proportions. That couldn't possibly be true if fighters, which are almost exclusively men, were being killed. And even Hamas, by mid-February, was admitting thousands of its fighters had died. And Israel was reporting over 11 or 12,000 of its fighters. And so you can't have the breakdown as being reported be true and at the same time have that many fighters also dying. So that was what led me to actually look more deeply into the numbers.
The UN clarified the number, saying it's based on the women and children identified, with thousands of bodies still left to identify. What do you make of that clarification?
Well, I mean, it's hard to understand what exactly these things mean. The bottom line is that they brought the percentage of women and children down substantially, almost by a factor of 2, which is the kind of numbers that I was actually predicting in roughly the range. And that makes sense if Israel is actually targeting men and the women and children that are dying are collateral damage, as opposed to the other narrative, which says they're just indiscriminately bombing, which would lead to a death percentages and death rates that match the population. So what they're putting out now is much more closely aligned with, I think, the final numbers will be. But I will say, in previous battles, and I heard you had a quote from someone who said that in the previous wars with Israel, their numbers were approximately right. That's actually not true. Their total counts were approximately right, but the breakdown into men, women, and fighters has not been right in the past. They have consistently underestimated and underreported the number of their own soldiers that have been killed.
So what do you think the lessons to be learned here are for future conflicts when looking at these numbers in the midst of war?
Well, the right lesson is to establish what we call a statistical set of beliefs that suggests that you can't accept without proof, and you're not going to get it until the war is over, numbers that come from Hamas. Israel doesn't put out numbers until it knows what they are with certainty or with much more accuracy, which means they don't put out numbers. I'm not saying that's actually a good strategy. It's probably not a good strategy. But the lesson is to take all of this and put it aside and wait until the battles are over, report what's happening, but do not put over too much emphasis on numbers, particularly when it comes from a police state like Hamas, which very carefully controls information.
Mr. Wyner, appreciate your time here on Canada Tonight. That is Abraham Wyner, a professor of statistics and data science at the University of Pennsylvania.